Welcome to the Point of Convergence podcast. I am your host, Grant Lira. Get ready to sit down, tune in, and implement. Remember, the knowledge you learn here and anywhere else in your life is only worth something to you if you use it. So get implementing after this episode and enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Point of Convergence podcast. Today, we are joined by Greg Johnson of Webcheck Security. Greg, how's everything going today, my friend?
Grant, awesome. It's great to be here with a positive, wonderful person that does cool stuff. And this podcast is one of those cool stuffs. So it's an honor. Thanks for having me on your show.
And you know what, man? Ditto, because just before this, you were talking a little bit. You came from a TV interview, it sounded like.
Yeah. I was lucky to do a little segment on one of the regional shows talking about cybersecurity, which is a big deal. And of course, that's what we do. And we've got a summit coming up on June 30th. So we got to talk about it a little.
There we go. And it's cool, right? A cybersecurity summit. It's kind of cool because I know in a lot of like businesses nowadays, including my own, so much of it is done online and you never really physically see those people. You never shake the people's hands. You never go up and meet them. A lot of the people you work with. So it's cool to kind of have an environment like that where you can actually go around, shake hands, kiss babies, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And it's also nice that, if you're not in Utah, where you guys are based out of, I know a lot of places weren't open for a long time. So we were just down in Dallas a while ago for a networking conference. And it's so refreshing to be able to go out and actually, physically meet people again.
Oh, I can't tell you. I flew to Tucson last month, and going into the airport, you still, because of the federal mandate, and every state is not in the same place. So you still have to put your mask on, right? And I'm scrambling. Oh no, do I have one? I find I've got masks in every pants pocket, every jeans pocket. They come out in the dryer. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. A pink fluorescent one. That's
Well, that's awesome. And yeah, I think a lot of us have had that same issue. It's like you go somewhere and you haven't worn a mask for a while. And yeah, maybe it's a federal building. And then you're like, do I have one? And sure enough, you have like 25 in your car. So you're good to go.
Yeah,
you're good to go. Greg, tell us a little bit about Webcheck. Tell us kind of your story. How'd you get started in this, man? Because I personally am super interested in cybersecurity. As you know, it's growing dramatically, right? The increased need for cybersecurity, not just on personal, but also business uses. So tell us how you got into that.
Sure, Grant. Well, the story goes back a ways. I hope we have some time.
We got time, brother. We got time.
Thanks. I'm one of those guys that I was pre-med, right? I was going to be a doctor, and because I love helping people. And I got involved in university in managing something that was called the Computer Distribution Center. This was at Brigham Young University like 100 years ago, back in 1984-ish or 85, I guess, right after I got married. And like you were like not even a twinkle, and your parents probably weren't even born yet. I don't know. But anyway, so I got involved in technology. The Mac 128K was coming out, and the IBM PC, the 5150 with a monochrome monitor and, 2 360 floppy drives. You remember the floppy drive thing, right? And I love technology. I love the reps that would come in and talk to us about all the cool new stuff that was coming out. And I realized this is what I want to do. This is really cool. So, fast forward several years, I worked for Novell. That's another kind of blast from the past, but they were the top dogs in the networking world. And I met a guy, Brad Caldwell, fantastic guy. He's the CEO of a company called Security Metrics. But back then, he was just a rep like me with Novell. And we parted ways. We met in Toronto. He left the company. Then he came back and did some cool stuff in marketing. And fast forward to 2006, I was looking for a career change, and I reached out to him. And he'd started this really cool cybersecurity company, Security Metrics, that does payment card industry compliance. And so I started doing strategic sales for him, and eventually moved into more of a strategic business development role with some of the big acquiring banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Anyway, that's where I cut my teeth on cybersecurity and frameworks. And PCI was a framework that was very prescriptive that said, hey, you got to have a firewall, you got to have scans, and you got to have these controls, and you got to have policies. And cybersecurity was pretty cool. So I was there for 6.5 years, and then I left to become a VP of sales at another organization. But really, that was a technology organization, but in the logistics space. And cyber was just my passion, Grant. So I had to get back into it. I reached out and had connected with another CEO that wanted to build out a cyber program. So I did that for a while. And then I went to a very large, rapidly growing security and compliance company called Align. Align's now about 100 million. They're approaching 100 million in revenue, growing fast, and they do all of the audits from SOC to ISO. Anyway, all that to say, I've had this just blessed career, and I've learned a lot about cybersecurity and compliance. And along the way, I also was VP of sales for a managed detection response company. It's like if you put monitors in your home so you can tell when bad guys break in. Well, networks have that too, right? And so I did that and ran their sales efforts. And then finally, we're getting there. So in 2018, I started Webcheck Security, and we started outsourcing a lot of the penetration tests. Penetration tests are where good guys that are very skilled, they're ethical hackers, hack in, right, to organizations, and they write up reports. And so we started doing that and outsourcing it to the company that I was actually working for at the time. And that worked out really well, Grant. And so bottom line is Webcheck took off, and in 2020, COVID was hitting, but our business was going like this, kind of hockey stick. And I took my friend who was the executive vice president of that other company, and we stepped off full time, and it's just been kind of sprinting to try and catch up to the demand. So anyway, that's a little bit about Webcheck. We're a risk mitigation and penetration testing company. So we do the pen tests, and then we provide outsourced experts to help with risk and compliance and vendor assessments and all those cyber program management things that corporations need, but they don't have the resources to fill.
And that's such a cool story too, because even going back to just a second ago, when you were talking about like COVID happening, like places who have been traditionally brick and mortar forever have now became online or hybrid, right, through COVID. So obviously there's way more demand for what you guys do. Like, how have you guys been dealing with that scale? How have you been dealing with that influx of people coming to you guys?
Well, that's the thing. When you're growing a corporation, you got to think scalability, right? And so just yesterday, I interviewed a young lady who is an expert mobile application tester, and then I forwarded her to my engineer to vet her and see if she's going to work out for our team. I'm always looking for people and contractors, and we may not use them for a while, but we've got to have them to be able to scale. But they've got to fit the culture and the mold. They've got to be able to be consultative and helpful and talk to people. That's what our business is based on. That's what our culture is based on, is serving others. So even in a business sense, in an engagement, I like to say, how can we serve you? And we look forward to serving you in this engagement, because that's really what it's all about. So anyway, it's trying to scale and make sure we have the personnel in place, or can pivot swiftly to find them to meet that demand. That's the biggest issue. It's not so much sales and going out there and sell. It's how do we deliver in a quality way, and how do we bring processes in. So anyway, we could have a larger discussion about that, but that's the challenge.
And you said something cool in there that I want to kind of dive into a little bit. Serving people, right? Like, one of our core pillars at Empathy is client delight. So serving people, in my mind, is kind of one and the same as that, right? You're not working for them, you're serving them. You are there to ensure that their journey throughout cybersecurity is pleasant, and they want to, they're not banging their head on the desk afterwards. So how do you guys go about that? I mean, obviously you said a little bit about being personable, stuff like that. What does that look like in your business?
Well, there's an old expression, the fish stinks from the head down, right? So if the business owner and some of the business management have bad attitudes, then it just permeates through the organization. But obviously the corollary to that is that if there's a positivity and a service-oriented attitude, you hear about servant leadership, right? And I believe that. So I try to inculcate that. I try to hire people that I know will be helpful. And I try to respect, our employees and contractors. as well. Sometimes you have employees that whine, or maybe there's a miscommunication and they're saying, hey, I'm frustrated with this. But you have to address that and say, hey, thanks for sharing that. Let's talk about that. I understand your position. Maybe I can help, but here's our side as well. Let's work this out. So, it's the attitude. I've worked for CEOs and bosses before that were kind of the opposite. So, well, that's just the way we do things. So tough, you just gotta suck it up, right? But that's Absolutely. Not what builds good culture. So anyway, it's the little things, Grant, that we do that build big culture.
Oh, totally. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a combination or a culmination of things, rather, of, everything you're doing to build that overarching picture of exactly what you want people to not only experience when they work with you, but also experience when they're working for you. Right. So that's kind of cool. And then in that same kind of aspect, I know that this industry is growing like crazy. So are you guys like finding it's hard to hire people? Or are you not hiring people quick enough? Like what's that look like in your day to day?
Well, it's only hard in the sense that there are a lot of fish in the sea, but only some of them have the right taste, and I've interviewed some, they may not have the right qualifications. And so we have kind of a minimum bar that before we'll really talk to them in terms of either experience or certifications. And then once we start talking to them, we have to have a sense that they want to help the customer. And so I make them get on a video call and have a dialogue and just see how they'll be. And then I do some things that are they need to show that they're responsive and proactive. So I'll put the onus on them and say, next step is you need to have an interview and discussion with my VP of engineering. Here's his contact info. If you want to move forward, reach out to him, and I leave it totally on them. I'll send him a heads up privately, or a blind card in it. But I want to see that they have initiative. And that says a lot, right? We also administer a test. So if they're willing to take the test, if they're willing to come on board under the premises that we first offer, and they have passion, then it's going to be a good fit. If they're just looking for money and, a job or whatever, then it's probably not going to be a good fit.
And you're right, because even not as relatable in your field, but you might find that this is sort of relatable, that like you can teach skills, but it's really, really hard to teach an attitude or to teach motivation. So like having that stuff is not something you can necessarily find out if a person has on paper. That's through, like you said, giving out the phone number. That's through the conversation they have on the other side of the telephone or computer. Like those things, in my opinion, are so underrated through different companies. And it shows when a company doesn't value that, or a company doesn't prioritize that as something they're looking for in a candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to find the right people. So that's the hard part of it. We get, I'll open up a job posting on LinkedIn and I may get 30 or 40 applicants in just a couple of weeks. But out of those, only about 5 to 30 are really going to be what we're looking for. So there's the challenge.
Absolutely. And so within Webcheck now, what kind of companies are you guys working with, right? What's the typical company look like? Is it larger corporations, is it smaller businesses? Like who are you guys usually working with?
Well, that's a good question, Grant. We are working with, first of all, a lot of good partners, and we categorize them in really 3 buckets. There's MSPs, if you know what that term is, managed security service providers. And those are organizations that are like managed IT companies. They go in and manage the IT resources, or they augment for other companies. So they don't have the expertise in-house to sell some cybersecurity services. They sell the technology. They'll install Sophos, for example, or CrowdStrike or whatever, but they don't do the other. So they'll resell our pen test and risk mitigation services, assessments, and that kind of thing. The other category, the other bucket is, I guess you call MSSPs. Those are organizations that are like cyber monitoring companies, similar to the one I used to work for, or other types of cyber consultancies that they may manage firewalls or provide certain services, but it's all very cyber focused. And then the third bucket of really good companies that we work for or that sell our services would be what you call assessment and assurance companies. Some of those are CPA firms, but they're cyber-focused CPA firms, right? And so those cyber-focused CPA firms will administer like SOC 2 audits. Have you ever heard of a SOC 2 audit?
I have not.
It's a very common certification in the industry right now with SaaS, software as a service companies, and technology service providers. Their clients will come to them and say, hey, show me your SOC 2 compliance, right? And so these CPA firms will come in and administer that SOC 2 audit, but it involves certain cyber controls, right? So it's a great partnership. They don't do pen testing, or if they do pen testing, they don't have enough guys or gals, as it were. And so we come in and augment that, and we can also provide services that a lot of those assurance companies don't, such as what we call FISA, Fractional Information Security Officer. So those are really the three really good partners and clients we have. And then we have direct clients as well. A lot of them are SaaS or software as a service companies. For the listeners, like you think of it this way, you log on to your bank and you have a portal and you see your stuff, and it's critical stuff, right? So we pen test stuff like that for fintech companies, QuickBooks, all the Intuit products, Salesforce. Those are the kinds of companies, small and large, that we work with to conduct tests, to provide risk and compliance augment, and that kind of stuff.
And how useful is that nowadays? Because going back maybe, 5 years ago, like SaaS companies, SaaS was around, but not as prevalent as it is today. But like, if you look at my monthly bills of like the expenses we have for the business, I mean, a good chunk of that is like SaaS products, right? So it's important because we all store so much stuff on there. Like banking was a great example, like absolutely right. Banking, I don't want that information getting out. So knowing that people go in, pen test those, and actually make sure they're secure makes me sleep a little better at night. But how are you guys finding these partners, not the direct clients, but the people that you mentioned, the first and second bucket? How do you go out and meet each other?
Well, we do a lot of networking events and trade shows where we can. Obviously, the trade show market was shut down for the past year, but that's changing. And we get referred a lot. We also look for different relationships and connections in some of the circles that we run with and play with, and we identify target customers, and we call them up or send an email and say, hey, we'd like to talk, we'd like to discuss. LinkedIn's a great tool, right? Because we have a lot of people coming out of the woodwork that want to talk to us, and sometimes they're in these target partnerships. Sometimes they want to sell us stuff, but then when they realize what we do and that there's a synergy, they realize that, we may not sell a lot of their stuff, but they can be a partner that we can refer, but they can make revenue reselling our cyber services that they don't have. So LinkedIn's a great tool. That's how we find a lot of folks. I'm excited to get back on the trade show circuit, though.
Yes.
So our summit on June 30th it's going to be awesome.
That's so exciting. And it's you said something in there cool where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you do a lot of like referrals through people. Like if they refer somebody to work with you, then you give them a kickback or you give them something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the best partnerships that we have, and we do all of the above, commission or just a referral fee, but our best partnerships are kind of a white label relationship where we actually become their department and their provider, and they bring us in, they give us their emails. So if it's XYZ, MSSP Corporation, we have an XYZ MSSP Corporation email, and we talk to their clients as if we were them. That works really well. On those calls, I go like this, so I hide the Webcheck Security. Right? And so, but those work really well, and So they sell our services, but on their proposals, on their statements of work, as XYZ Corporation, and then we just come in and we're in the background delivering the service.
And that's actually so cool. I'm so happy you brought that up, because I don't think I've ever talked about this on camera or on the podcast, but white labeling is such a cool and unique opportunity, whether you're doing white labeling or you're being white labeled yourself. Like, I think there's kind of a negative stigma around it, but don't have that stigma. Like, give it a shot, because you can make so many new connections. You can obviously get business you wouldn't have otherwise. And then if you're falling short on something and you know somebody who's really good at, that thing you're falling short on, you can bring them in, white label them, have them be part of your, team for the time being, and utilize their assets and their skills too. Like, white labeling is awesome. When it's done correctly, it works really, really good.
It is. And you just have to treat the partners like they're a white glove client. And realize they're a great source of revenue, because the bottom line is I don't have to go out and hire a big sales force or spend a ton of money marketing, because they're out doing it for us, right? And conversely, we're supporting them and serving them in a way that they don't have those services themselves. So it can be very symbiotic, but you have to give and expend in those relationships.
No, absolutely. And like, we white label for a few companies as well. And it's even easier on our end then, because when we do that, I never hop on the Zoom. I never have to do that, right? We just get told, hey, here's what they need, make it happen. Cool. Too easy. So it's literally taking out like one of the most, in a lot of people's businesses, stressful parts of it, which is like the sales process, closing, dealing with the clients, like all that stuff, right? That's getting taken out. You're getting told directly what needs to be done, and that's it. So it's easy. Obviously, having your own business, building up your own brand is super important, but don't overlook white labeling, because white labeling is super cool. So within that, something I'm curious on, and I want to, if it's cool with you, I want to put you through a scenario.
Okay.
Cool. So company, say 3-4 years old, right? LLC. Again, we'll use just a marketing agency as an example, because that's what I know, right? So a marketing firm, marketing agency, whatever you want to call it. They're doing all their stuff. They have a lot of SaaS platforms. They're working mostly online. They've never met a lot of their employees that they have now. They don't necessarily have much cybersecurity at all, other than like what Google offers or what like other, SaaS services that they use offer. Like, what's your take on that? When is the soonest you should start implementing cybersecurity? What would you do in the shoes of that company?
Well, that's an interesting scenario, because a lot of times companies don't recognize what cybersecurity really is or what their risk is and there are two factors that happen. Either one, they get popped. And ransomware, it's all the girl at the dance right now. Everybody wants to dance with ransomware because it's so ubiquitous, right? Or two, a client of theirs or a prospective client comes to them and says, hey, love your SaaS, love your technology, but we need to see you're secure. So show us your annual pen test. Show us your vendor assessment. Oh, you don't have one? Well, we've got 100 questions and we'd like you to fill these out, right? And that's when they realize, okay, this client's worth $100,000 to us this year, and we got to do something about it. So that's typically, I don't know if I answered the question, but
you did.
That's what happens with that scenario. So we'll come in, and the first thing that would be appropriate to do is not necessarily to just run off and do a penetration test. We can do those, and those are good too. Where the window's open. The door may be locked, but you've got 20 windows open, and you can let all kinds of things in, right? But it's even more appropriate to take a step back, realizing that cybersecurity is not just about technology. It's not just about penetration testing, but it's about policy, practice, procedure, and by practice, do you have a cyber program, right? What a lot of companies don't realize is that, for example, your HR practices, your onboarding, your offboarding. Once Jeff leaves the company, do you take his key, right? Once Sally is onboarded, does she have the appropriate individual passwords and certificates and tokens? And does she only have access to the things she needs to have access to? So there are all these things, that are associated with cybersecurity that creates a big Thanksgiving pie, with mincemeat and pumpkin lemon and apple, and you got to have all of them at the Thanksgiving table. Otherwise, it's not very filling. So that ideally, we take that company, do an assessment, find out where they are, show them where the gaps are, and that you got to have the pecan and the pumpkin piece at least. And we prioritize and start building that cyber program for them.
And so you said something within there. You said a few things I really liked. One of the things you said I really liked was, when's the correct time to invest in cybersecurity? You'll know when it's the correct time, right? Yeah. The second thing is, it's interesting to think, because you brought up a really good point, being cybersecurity in most people's minds is all internet stuff. It's all up there. It's in the cloud. It's in wherever they don't see it. But you can have like the most Loctite, Fort Knox, cybersecurity programs, softwares ever. And if your practices aren't good and you're not being secure with your information, you're not giving out the correct credentials to people, you're not giving them just the passwords they need, I mean, you're your biggest liability there.
Yeah, and even let's talk about the Colonial Pipeline attack. Bottom line is, they didn't have multi-factor authentication on their VPN. And for listeners that don't know what that means, it just means a special way in a firewall that you have to authenticate into with more than just a password. Usually there's some kind of a token as well. And then it makes your traffic secure. Well, they had that, but the bottom line is, somebody got phished, their credentials got phished. They were able to get into that, and there wasn't a second authentication factor. For example, most banks nowadays, and I just say this to help our listeners understand what MFA or multi-factor authentication is. You go into your bank portal, I think it's pretty much mandated by law now. They will send you a text, or they will call you. They'll ask you what that second factor is, or send you an email, and you have to respond before that portal will let you in, right? You've seen that on your own financial portal. Well, it's the same thing authenticating into an infrastructure in a firewall. Colonial didn't have that second factor installed. The ironic thing is, they were going to hire a cybersecurity ad out stating that they were hiring, and they got popped. But that speaks to security awareness, phish training that happens semi-annually. There are just so many things in the policies, and yeah, technology is a big part of it, but it's not the only part of it.
Yeah, and so that's really interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that's like kind of recent, and I haven't, just being transparent, I haven't looked too much into that, but that's something where, like, God, I think even my Facebook now, I just got a new phone, and relogging into everything, relogging into all my Facebook, my Instagram, my other stuff that I use for work, like that stuff, almost everything now uses two-factor authentication, right? You log in, they send you the text, you type in the number that the text sent you, and boom, you're in. So that way somebody out in Russia is not phishing for your password dues. So that's really cool. Now, on that same topic still, technology is changing by like the minute. I mean, it grows exponentially. It changes exponentially. So what are you guys doing to be proactive? Are you kind of like playing war games with yourself about what the future looks like? Are you continuing to test it? Like, how does that work to keep proactive in this field? Because I imagine it's a full-time job in and of itself.
It is, and it's really tough. I think you go to conferences, you go to workshops, but the bottom line is I'm not the smart one in the organization. I'm just the dumb guy that's trying to keep the business afloat. And I have these really cool engineers that go out and research things and bring me ideas. And so fortunately, they're the ones that are plugged in to a lot of this, and passionately so, because they love it. And for example, I just hired a project manager that I've known him for many years. In fact, he was retired on the beach with a metal detector. Well, not really with a metal detector, but he did retire down to Baja California, Mexico, at Ensenada, this beautiful location. But he was kind of bored out of his mind. He was playing video games all day, And so I called him up and said, Thomas, anyway, bottom line is, he's got my Salesforce integrated with our website, and he's working on all these cool projects. And so I rely on the smart people that I hire to keep us abreast of technology and to keep us, our processes and things going. But anyway, that's how we do it.
Yeah. And just like to put it into maybe a more relatable perspective for like our listeners, if you're not super into this, like every time your phone gets an update, right? Your iOS, Android, whatever the case is, you look in the notes and what's being updated almost every single time you see security. And that's because, the last security patch now is outdated because they found a new way to get into this one.
Somebody figured it out.
And I mean, think about that though. Like, how many times is that happening where someone figures something out, they find that window, and then they have to patch it again, and then it's just like a cat and mouse game back and forth. And I mean, it's never going to end. Like, there's no end to it. People are always finding ways into things. It blows my mind, that aspect of cybersecurity, just how many like creative solutions people find to get around certain like firewalls and certain passwords, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. It's funny. My partner uses a kind of an analogy to that. If you heard me talking to somebody, he was standing in the corner and said, "Hey, can I go in the picture?" I said, "No, this is a video podcast. Get out." but he's that's his chair there. It's a funny guy. He says, "Yeah, you build a wall, and the bad guys build a ladder that can get over the wall. So you build a bigger wall, and they just build a taller ladder. You build more wall, they build a taller ladder. And that's so it's a cat and mouse game, and it's a never ending struggle to keep up with it."
That's a great analogy. And I mean, that's spot on. So on the same topic here again, looking towards the future, what's your guys' future look like? Are you looking to get into different fields or different respects of cybersecurity? What's the next, let's say, 5 years looking like for you guys?
Well, we're excited. First of all, we're finding that this good old risk and compliance augmentation service that we provide, it's just getting bigger. And I'm going to need to hire more practitioners. And so there's that. And so is the penetration testing market. But we've also got some technology that we're working on that we can throw into the mix that we're very excited about. Our partners keep expanding. So I think what we're excited about and strategically working towards is expanding our partnership base, introducing some unique technologies, but really just staying the course and delivering expert cyber governance, cyber augmentation, and of course, hacking the crap out of people when they ask us to.
That's awesome.
And that's a key, when they ask us to.
Yes.
Giving them a report and helping them, by saying, here's all the reports that we do, incidentally, they have remediation advisement. Here's how you need to fix this. And then if they don't get it, then we get on the phone with them and we consult. And so at the end of the day, when you hack the crap out of people, I say that kind of loosely, but the end game is making them better. How do we make you better with your cyber posture?
And so within that penetration testing, when somebody, like, let's say I want to have our CRM penetration tested, are you having one person go out to do that? Are you having a team of people work on it? Like, how does that process actually work?
Yes. So in most cases, it's just one guy or gal that's doing the penetration test. I select the engineer based on skill and availability and the scope of the test. And that's typically what works. You may have one or two or three web applications, some internal and external infrastructure or Wi-Fi access points. And usually one person will shepherd that, which is good because then they can get on the phone and explain what they did and what they found. And if they missed anything, they can go back in and look at their data and retest or whatever. But typically we get jobs that are very large. Right now, as a matter of fact, we're working with one of our clients that has about 16 web applications. And in internal infrastructure, external infrastructure, and it's a crazy thing. So in that case, we've got three guys working on it. One prime that's doing some of the testing, a secondary guy that's doing another portion of the testing, and one that may be doing just the internal IP or external IP. So we coordinate that, and yeah, sometimes it does take a little army to complete a project.
That's interesting. Yeah, I guess it all depends on the scale of the project. And last thing I'll ask you here, Greg, is just like going back to yourself right before the company kind of blew up, right before your company started. If you could go back in time, give yourself a piece of advice, tell yourself something, what would that be? What would you want to tell yourself? What would you want to know?
Wow. If I go right back to the point in time where I was still a full-time employee with another organization, and this was kind of a nice side gig, but I was fearful of, when should I step off? Am I going to make it? But you all these things go through your mind. I would tell myself at that point, and that wasn't that long ago. We're only talking 3 years ago, but I would say, you know what? Go forward in faith and not fear. There's almost a religious context there, right? Faith and fear are opposites. But if you're confident in your ability and what you're delivering, and I believe you have to rely on a higher power as well, but go forward, don't sit and ruminate about all the stuff that'll happen and, oh, gee, am I going to be able to make it? Sure, you plan and you have backups and blah, blah, blah. But don't fear, have faith.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And Greg, where can we learn more about you? Where can we get in contact with you? Website, social medias. This is your time to drop anything you want, brother.
Okay. Well, thanks. So they can go to webchecksecurity.com. That's pretty easy, right? Webcheck, just like you see on the wall, Webcheck Security, all one word, only add the .com. and you can see the management team bios. There's all kinds of information. In fact, if anyone's interested in registering for our cyber conference on the 30th, in or out of Utah, we welcome everyone. Fly in. It's going to be worth it. A pop-up will come up and there's registration there. Other than that, there's all kinds of resources and videos and information. They can also connect with me on LinkedIn. If they search Webcheck Security, the corporate profile will come up and you can navigate to my link. I'd say it on the air here, but they're like this long. So, just go to LinkedIn and search for us. And here's a little known fact, Grant. We didn't talk about this, but I sing in this very famous organization called the Tabernacle Choir, formerly known as the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. If they go to Tabernacle, I think it's the Tabernacle Choir or tabernaclechoir.org. There's been a broadcast running for 92 years on TV and radio, and I'm on that every Sunday morning. We've been on hiatus for the last year with COVID, but we're just starting back on August 26th. And the first live broadcast in over a year is on September 19th. So they can learn more about that there. Lots of fun stuff. So anyway, I've said enough. I've taken enough of your time, Grant. I appreciate letting me be on here today.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're knocking the dust off the pipes, getting back out there and doing that singing. Awesome. Greg, it's been a blessing to meet you today, brother. Really, really good stuff today, guys. Like I said before, make sure that this stuff doesn't just stay up here in your head. Implement it, go forward, and do, as we are sharing on this podcast. So with that being said, Greg, I want to give you one last thanks for coming on, brother.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Awesome.